Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. And we're coming to you from a gallery in East London today because I'm joined by one of the most influential contemporary artists in the Western world. Shepard Fairey is known for all sorts of images. The one you probably will remember instantly is the Hope poster for Barack Obama, but there's much, much more to him, and we're going to explore that during the course of this interview. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And actually, this exhibition that you're doing is sort of a retrospective.
It is. It's the 30-year anniversary of when I started street art, and I'm always moving forward, but I think that's enough of a milestone, pretty significant to last 30 years in a street art world. So I'm giving people that might be younger members of my audience a quick overview of both the evolution and the consistency in what I've done through my career.
Do you think of yourself as a street artist, first and foremost?
Well, I think of myself as an artist, but most people categorize me as a street artist because I do a lot of public art with and without permission, large scale, small scale, and that's a genre that's sort of, you could say trendy now, but I just consider myself an artist with an agenda to democratize art. I want to reach people through as many platforms as possible. I think that galleries and museums have their place, but they shouldn't be the only venues for people to experience art.
Is street art primarily about rebellion and protest?
I mean, I think for a lot of people it is. It's about saying, you've told me I need to exist in this one way, but I've got other ideas and try to stop me. And that's definitely part of the impulse that's driven me, but I also am not just about rule breaking. I'm about saying visual communication and the spreading of ideas is viable and empowering in a lot of different ways, and any way in which someone can say, I can use my voice without having deep pockets or connections, I'm all in favor of.
I suppose you became known for Andre the Giant, which is just on that wall behind me, which was these tiny little images of this French wrestler.
Right.
What were you doing there? What was the idea?
Well, when I started in 1989, I really was just goofing around with some skateboard and punk rock friends. And the Andre sticker started with me trying to teach a friend how to make a stencil. I looked through the newspaper, saw an ad for wrestling of Andre, and said, why don't you make a stencil of this? So the Andre thing was started off as almost like a skateboarding punk rock chain letter within a small community. But what I noticed was putting stickers in some public places that were meant to just be noticed by my friends were catching the attention of a lot of people. And that started to raise issues of the control of public space and image absorption, things that were more profound than what I had originally intended. And because I have my eyes and my mind open, I quickly realized that disrupting the usual semiotics of consumption and control of public space was actually really powerful and provocative.
It evolved into Obey.
Yeah.
Now, what was in your mind with Obey? Because we're basically the same age. So you'd grown up with, this explosion in consumer culture with Reaganism, the Cold War. I mean, did you feel that you were being sort of railroaded down a trajectory as a young American kid? Or?
Well, I did, not just because of the, overarching shift towards conservatism and it all being about the individual, the me generation of the 80s with Reagan. It was also because I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, which is very conservative. My mom was head cheerleader, my dad was captain of the football team. I went to a preppy school, and I was unhappy, but I didn't understand why until I discovered skateboarding and punk rock, which were these anti-conformist, anti-mainstream movements. And that gave me an outlet for my creativity that I'd never had. I liked drawing, but drawing to me wasn't associated with something culturally cool. There was no hip art galleries in South Carolina. I was a teenager anyway, teenagers don't care about art galleries. And so, making stencils and stickers as part of that world was very liberating for me. And it felt like I was, if not pushing back in an overt way, I was at least making my own path, which felt like doing something.
What does obey mean to you then?
I was a big fan of the dead Kennedys who were questioning Reagan's agenda, and then I read the book 1984. I read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So the seeds were already planted for me to be, questioning hegemony, conformity, and systems of oppression. So when I saw this silly movie in the early 90s called They Live, a John Carpenter movie, and the word obey appears as, along with many other words, as part of the set design, obey struck me as the thing that is in the ether, that people, people follow the path of least resistance. They're told, well, this is the right way to do it. This is society's expectation. These are the rules. But a lot of times it's positioned as choices we make, of our own free will. But when you confront someone with the concrete, you hit them in the face with obey. They say, what makes you the authority? Do I want to buy that? Do I want to listen to that? Do I agree with that? And I felt like using the word obey, even if it just made people say, obey what? Was a way of maybe getting them to question the agenda of everything they're confronted with.
Haven't we ended up obeying? You had a Big Brother image as well.
Yes.
We live in a Big Brother society. I've travelled from one side of London to the other. I've been caught on camera 100 times. Everything about me is known and captured. I now look at that image and I think, well, yeah, we live in a Big Brother society.
We do, and my show here in London in 2007 was called 1984 because London seemed to lovingly embrace closed-circuit television post 9/11, despite, ironically, the setting of 1984 in London, where Orwell is written a cautionary tale about surveillance. And it's the same in the United States, but and people don't have to be under surveillance in clandestine ways. They choose to share everything about their lives through all the social media platforms, signing away their right to privacy in the process. We can consciously push back, even with the changes that technology has brought about, and I think that studying the issues and voting in a way that that's educated, that will push the leaders to do things that you feel ethically comfortable with is one way. Choosing how you spend your money is another way. I'm not a defeatist. There's still many tools at our disposal to minimize Big Brother making us his slave.
And do you think the imagery of street art is powerful enough, though, right now, to make people stop and think and change the way they behave? You've arrived in London as Extinction Rebellion are kicking off and trying to bring the capital to a standstill with big stunts.
I love what they do.
You love that?
Yeah. Extinction Rebellion is, I think that they're radical, which is great, because climate change is a very, very serious thing. I'm addressing it in a lot of my work and supporting organizations like 350.org. Extinction Rebellion, I communicated with, and they said that they weren't comfortable because I had a brand, and brands have carbon footprints, and it would seem hypocritical. I personally believe that it's possible for capitalism and a livable planet to exist together, but capitalism needs definitely needs to be modified for that to work.
So it was your clothing brand that they objected to, was it?
They didn't even say my clothing brand; they just said brand. And yeah, but it's possibly the clothing brand. And I agree. It's very difficult to have a viable brand and be ethical about the sustainability of the materials. We have categories of sustainability in our brand, and the products cost a little bit more, and most of the stores say, no, our consumer's not going to pay the extra couple dollars for that. So it's a combination of the consumers needing to demand the right things, which I'm always pushing for in the way I communicate about about how you can make a difference with your spending. But it also it's also very, very challenging to look at just the forces within capitalism that don't make it easy to do the right thing. And I believe that smart people can figure out ways to make products they're proud of and sell them to people and not ruin the planet at the same time. But it's going to require a lot more people thinking that way.
I mean, you described the things you have to wrestle with in terms of sustainability of your clothing. Yeah. What have you ended up doing about that? Have you given in to the retailers, or have you, and said, okay, we'll use the cheaper stuff that's less sustainable, or have you started?
Well, it's a constant battle, and what we've done is given them some of the things that they ask for, and then ask them to return the favor by also stocking the things that we want, and saying, let's at least have an A/B demonstration here, so that you can see. Don't underestimate your customer. And sometimes we triumph, and sometimes they say, Our customer just doesn't care. You care, but they don't care. They just want a cool T-shirt. I find that depressing, but I also don't want to become an isolationist based on maybe the idealism I have, or the idea of withdrawing to have more purity, because me having more purity by myself is not going to fix things at all. My work going out there, and the ideas in my work seeping in through street art, through prints I make, through clothing. I actually think that even if in the short term I've got a carbon footprint, which I do a lot to try to minimize, in the long term, if the ideas actually translate, I think there's more potential for good to come out of it. And maybe I'm overestimating people, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have some belief that people's ideas can be changed through art.
I mean, it's very striking that you're comfortable saying you're a capitalist, which, and I wonder how that goes down with your contemporaries and colleagues in street art.
It's funny because capitalism is the system. So I'm a capitalist because I'm working within that system. It's not because I'm so excited about profit and I measure my success through that. I measure my success through the ways my images resonate. But working within that system, I'm empowered to share my work on my own terms because I have the resources to do it. So that requires a certain level of success within capitalism. It's freedom. It's for me, it's not it's not buying fancy things, or I'm not ostentatious. It's about the freedom to then donate to the causes I believe in, to do the next project that costs me money instead of making me money. And I think anyone that just boils it down to you're an evil capitalist is not really paying attention to the nuances of my practice. I feel comfortable with where I am operating within the very challenging ethical areas of capitalism. I think that my practice holds up under scrutiny.
Because I suppose the other area that's interesting with that is copyright, especially with street art, where people paint over each other's work and tag each other's work and borrow or steal or copy or whatever it might be. So how do you feel about copyright?
I mean, copyright to me is there to protect people from bootlegging. And bootlegging is very different from parody, satire, homage, remix. I'm all for all of those things. I'm not for bootlegging. Bootlegging is when you make something, you build up its cultural resonance to a point, and then someone says, okay, great, we'll take it from here and make money without doing any of the foundational work that you did. And that happens to me a lot with, especially with things like t-shirts and hats and even prints sometimes. But when I see people taking my work and riffing off of it, I have no problem with that. So to me, copyright is there to protect people from bootlegging, and otherwise, everything in not just art, but culture, science, technology, is built upon what's come before, and copyright's not there to stop that. Copyright should be there just to protect people from something that is a bootleg of what they've done.
How do you think the power of art has changed in your lifetime because of the internet and social media?
Social media has allowed images to go viral, which can be really powerful. Something like my Hope poster or the We the People images that I made for the Women's March in 2017, sort of anti-inauguration. Those went viral in ways globally, both of those. That could never have happened prior to the internet, and that can be very meaningful when it becomes such a universal reference point. But also, people are digesting so many images; it's really overwhelming, and they cycle through quickly. So, I think that there's also the problem of the internet devaluing things, because everything's free and everything's disposable. But I always work within, rather than just complaining about the challenges, I just try to rise to address them. And I'm grateful that my work can reach a large audience through social media, but I still think it's very important for me to do physical art pieces. Some people are they're fine to just create things digitally and share them digitally. I think that the visceral impact of a mural, a physical art piece that's got texture and depth, that's just not replaceable. And I can document those things and share them digitally, but what my hope is that encourages someone to get that out there in the air where molecules are colliding and experience it. And when someone calls them on the phone, don't say, oh my God, I might have to respond to someone in real time. Voicemail, I'll text you back, yo dog, what's up? We're here, we're talking, I'm answering your questions. I want things to work like that.
Because a lot of your work is very intricate in terms of how you actually make it technically.
Yeah, it is.
Why do you feel the need to do it that way?
Well, my work is a blend of traditional illustration and graphic design, and then more modern techniques that screen printing, and I use the computer for some design elements in my work. The computer's a step, but the sophistication of a layered surface, it's hard to put into words. It sounds very pretentious when I try to describe it, but you know it when you see it, you feel it, and that that idea of working through solving a problem in a way where that's physical, where happy accidents happen. You get some paint on your hands. I still think that there's something to that that's the same as why a handshake or a hug is more meaningful than just a Snapchat.
Have you got paint on your hands because you've been out graffitiing the walls of London? Yeah,
I've been painting some murals since I've been here. So I was actually working this morning before I came over here.
Whereabouts are they? Where can we go see them?
They're two sides of the Beats by Dre gallery space where I'm also showing, and then And then I have another one that's in Hackney. It's in Hackney. A lot of my work is about just encouraging people to not be apathetic and complacent, to think that every action makes a difference, and vote, spend your money wisely, and just give a shit.
How does it feel when you do something like that, and before long somebody's going to come and paint over it or write over it?
I've been in street art 30 years. Most of my pieces don't last that long. It's an ephemeral art form. I think you as an artist, you have to become very comfortable with enjoying the process and not being precious about the product. I am always happy when something lasts, but I know that it's a world of many transgressions. Maybe the least harmful of which is somebody writing over my mural. Some people tag on my stuff because they consider me too mainstream now, a sellout. Some people write over my stuff because they know that my work will be photographed and it will get them attention. I consider myself an ally with all the other people doing things on the street because we're all taking risks. But I respect the courage and the impulse to go make one's mark on the world enough to not worry about it and to just keep creating.
You've been arrested, haven't you, doing it?
Yeah, I've been arrested 18 times.
And prosecuted?
Well, yeah, I've had to pay fines and spent a little time in jail here and there, but some pretty steep fines sometimes. But I've been denied my insulin while I've been in jail. I'm a type 1 diabetic. To me, it's a lot of the punishment for street art is disproportionate to the crime. But as Joe Strummer says, authority has no inherent wisdom.
Why were you denied insulin? Deliberately?
Oh, yeah, multiple times. Yeah,
with them knowing that they were doing that?
Do you think that civilization is always civil? My experience, this is one of the reasons I question authority so consistently, because I've seen power abused, firsthand, where I'm in for putting a sticker up or a poster, and I'm denied my insulin for days at a time. This has happened 3 times. I've been punched by the police multiple times for low-level things where I wasn't resisting arrest. It's just when people know that their power is unchecked, there's a lot of sadism.
How did the Obama Hope image come about, and why do you think it was so successful?
Well, I was doing a lot of work protesting the Bush agenda and the Iraq War in the early to mid 2000s, and when I saw Obama speak at the 2004 DNC, I was impressed with his speech. I wasn't aware of who he was, and he hadn't been in politics that long at that point, but he was clearly a gifted orator. Then in late 2007, when he announced his candidacy, I started to do a bit more research about him, and he was talking about reducing the power of corporate lobbyists in Washington, about the need for universal health care, about a need for more of a green economy and environmental responsibility, about he wanted to pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan, he wanted to close Guantanamo Bay. All of those things were the antithesis of Bush and Cheney, and I thought, well, I usually just protest things, but this is a moment when I should support this person because I believe he's viable and has good ideas, and that's very unique to mainstream politics in the United States. So I was unsure that my endorsement would be welcome, because I'd done a lot of things that were criticized as being unpatriotic. Now I disagree, because I think that patriotism is about wanting to be proud of the country and pushing it in a direction you can be proud of. Nationalism is just falling in line with the agenda of the power structure. They're very different. But I didn't want to be seen as a liability to the campaign with my endorsement. So I reached out to a friend. He talked to someone in the campaign, and they said, yeah, if he wants to make his own poster, go ahead. It wasn't done officially through the Obama campaign. So I made the image, the Hope poster, and my idea was that Obama was still seen as new and unproven. He was facing the challenge of being non-white, a half black guy. So my idea was to use red, white, and blue, portray him as someone with vision, and in a stylized and idealized way. And even though it's purely implicit, the idea that someone's earned the respect of being depicted in that way, almost as a two-dimensional statue, I think that impacts people, and then people also respond to that sense of vision, which you see in the famous John F. Kennedy image or the Che Guevara image, which everyone responds to, whether they agree with his politics or not. Quickly, the Obama campaign said, "Hey, this image is really going viral quickly. We like it. Do you mind doing a version that says hope or change?" Those are the words we're using. And I like the word hope a lot because I think without hope, people don't act. So hope is the first step towards action. And the Bush years for a lot of people felt hopeless. So, it was aspirational. But I think it caught on because Obama was really compelling as a speaker. He was somebody that was so positive and talking about the potential of the United States. It was based on, a loftier ideal rather than fear. Bush's agenda was driven by fear, and even though it's easier to wrangle people with fear, I think that ultimately it brings out the better side of people's nature to use hope.
A lot of people who supported Obama in those days will now talk about their disappointments with him. Were you disappointed, or do you think he delivered?
Obama did not deliver everything I wanted, but that wasn't all his fault. He was obstructed at every turn by the Republicans. There were a few key issues that I was not happy about. The drone strikes, which were presented as based on surgical precision, perfect information about who the victim would be, which turned out not to be true. So to me, it was not an ethical program. It was terrorism as a form of counterterrorism, which I just can't stand hypocrisy.
Why do you think he got away with that without being really challenged on it? I mean, had George Bush been doing that, I mean, he did, obviously.
Yeah, he
but,
did.
But a lot of that growth happened under Obama, and he did kind of get away with it, didn't he?
I think that I think that people were so hesitant to thinking they had to make the false choice between troops or drones. I would say you could have neither, but the drones seemed like a superior option, and I think a lot of Americans say non-American lives are worth less. I don't say that. I consider myself a world citizen, and I think everyone's life is equally valuable. And I was very distraught about that. I was also distraught about Obama's defense of the PRISM program, the secret surveillance of computer and cell phone communications that Edward Snowden revealed, and I think Snowden's a hero for doing that. But then things like marriage equality and healthcare reform, which didn't go nearly far enough, and pushing for better environmental standards for automobiles and coal factories and coal plants and things like that. All of those things, I think we're going in the right direction. I mean, Trump has gone in the wrong direction on everything. He's the worst president the United States has ever had. And, so Obama looks like an absolute saint in comparison. It's almost insulting to compare the two. But yeah, I'm a perfectionist, so of course I had a few complaints about Obama.
So what are you doing to take on Trump?
I'm not taking on Trump himself at all. He's such a narcissist that even addressing him is more than he deserves. I'm taking on the underlying issues: racism, sexism, xenophobia, environmental destruction, climate change. I'm looking at Trump as a symptom, and yes, he's exacerbating a lot of these issues, but I'd rather appeal to people in in a way that doesn't make it about partisan politics, that just makes it about which side of history do you want to be on? Do you want to be, pro-planet, pro-human, pro-equality, pro-justice, or do you want what Trump is pushing? And it's part of all the work that I'm making, really, that just looking at how we can treat each other and the planet better. It's really simple stuff.
I mean, do you think racial injustice is the biggest challenge?
Well, Trump is trying to stir up racism and xenophobia as as a tool to energize his base. But that's happening in Western Europe and Greece, and I'm not sure why racism is on the rise to such a degree. I think maybe it's because enjoying the spoils of globalization without thinking about how that changes some of the dynamics of the world is what people are confronted with now. Like, hey, now people who've seen how exploiting cheap labor in other parts of the world has benefited here, and they like the lifestyle here, and they want to come here, but no, we don't want them. We want to keep this a one-sided thing. That seems a little unfair to me. But at the same time, it's quite complex, and racism is not that complex. It's very primitive and simple. But why certain forces are pushing it is complex. And I think all you have to do is look at whose agenda is benefited by people saying someone that's not the same religion as I am or the same color as I am is my enemy, not these more monolithic corporate forces. Ignore that. Look at this. It's the unseen hand of manipulation, because a lot of people don't actually look at the big picture and understand why they're being manipulated.
And are you able to sort of work out why you've become the person you've become, rather than a sort of a conservatively, politely racist, preppy American capitalist, that you could quite easily have become from, given your background? I mean,
sure. No, I don't know. I don't know, other than I always responded to things that seemed to champion the underdog or be sympathetic with the oppressed, and I also was very poor for the first 10 years of my career, and as a white, straight male, still felt like a second-class citizen. So my compassion for people who work hard and can't get ahead and aren't white and male and heterosexual is, my compassion's pretty intense, because being looked down upon is no fun. And so I just want things to be more equal, more fair, for people to have more opportunities, and I don't want anyone to be inhibited based on something superficial. I just want merit to be the thing that matters, and even for the people that can't create something of merit that will get them ahead or have a strong work ethic, for people to at least be compassionate to people who, struggle because they aren't gifted. It's, these are principles that are woven into almost every religion, and yet somehow they're not borne out in practice. I'm not religious at all, but they, treat other people like you want to be treated. The meek shall inherit the earth. Like, where is that actually being manifested in the way our societies work? So it's for me, they're just really simple principles that are just sort of like life advice that got woven into religions, and I'm not religious, but the stuff is there. And for all the people that are religious, like, why are you ignoring these sort of major pillars of what should be your faith?
What about your artistic influences? I mean, I'm kind of looking over your shoulder and thinking sort of Soviet art over there. I mean, what are they?
My art influences come from a lot of different places. Punk album covers, traditional art and design. I used to love the Impressionists. You don't see any of my work looking like Impressionism, but I love Chuck Close's photorealism. But pop art, of course, was big for me. Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Roy Lichtenstein. And then people who emerged in the 80s, like Barbara Kruger. Barbara Kruger appropriates black and white photographs and runs a red type bar through it with white type, and it's it's very bold, and it has a connection to the style of advertising or propaganda posters. And then, of course, propaganda art, especially Russian constructivist art. So my work is it's sort of a hybrid of a lot of those things, but the Russian constructivist influence is definitely one that for a while I was was really, really obvious, and it's still some of those principles of reducing things to their most iconic essence and using a limited color palette still exist in my work, even if I'm not using all the obvious things like exclamation points, stars and arrows and angles. And
in terms of propaganda, the way propaganda is used now is very different, isn't it? I mean, it's much more real, I suppose. I mean, Trump, Boris Johnson in this country, they are their own propaganda in many ways, in the way they behave and the things they say. They don't rely on that kind of imagery and advertising message that leaders of old did.
A lot of people are using the propaganda of their personality, their charisma. Trump latched on to the term fake news and hijacked it, and so now the fake news is associated with MSNBC and CNN and a lot of the more reputable outlets, because Trump has realized that if he just muddies the waters, that no one knows really what the truth is, and that is hard to combat. But I just urge anyone to look at the sources, look at what the agenda might be from the source, and think, is a scientist that works for a fossil fuel company more credible, or is a scientist that works for an academic institution more credible?
To bring it back just to street art, I mean, if you say street art to most people in this country, their probably first thought is probably Banksy. What do you think of what Banksy does and the way he's viewed?
I think Banksy is really, really smart with his work. It's easy to understand, and yet frequently touches on things in a way that no one's quite articulated. And that's the power of seeing an image that is almost this sounds a little bit goofy, but an instant classic, because it articulates something that is going on, or that is fairly universal with a simple picture, and Banksy's very good at that. He's also very good at being meta, at being inside what he's critiquing in a way that looks like he was a cog in a wrench in the cogs rather than just a part of the machine itself. Yet in order to speak the language and be part of capitalism, he's in some ways participating in what he's critiquing. I'm the same way. I just don't think I'm always as clever as he is. This shop that he just opened to keep a greeting card company from being able to take his copyright and trademark of his images is, that's a bit of capitalist self-preservation that he's going through. Yet he's revealing the parasitic nature of capitalism at the same time. So you could say there's some good social commentary going on within something that is also about him protecting himself.
I mean, it must be very hard having to curate this exhibition, you know, after 30 years. Do you have, you know, favorite images, or do they change?
My favorite images are always the ones I'm working on in that moment. Once I'm finished with them, they're, you know, they're out in the world having their life, and sometimes the response is different than what I thought it would be, and sometimes images take on a more significant meaning to me because they took on a more significant meaning for the audience, and so I'm definitely taking into consideration the reaction, but everything I make is meant to convey what I want it to convey. Hopefully it's going to resonate, create conversations, and some are more effective than others. And it doesn't mean that I think that the art is better in the ones that resonate more. Sometimes it's about that, you know, that moment in the zeitgeist, and just all the different variables that have to align for something to go viral. And you know, sometimes I've made something and then 3 years later it actually catches on rather than when I first made it.
We've talked quite a lot about the things you believe in. I mean, if you could have a magic wand and change the world, what would be your priority?
Well, my first priority would probably be to make sure that the planet is going to stay inhabitable, and not just for humans. There are a lot of amazing species that are going extinct because of environmental destruction and climate change, and you know, I don't want that. I want diversity within the human population and beyond. You know, the other thing, I'd love to redistribute the wealth, because when you make money, it's easier to make more money. I know that firsthand, and I'm not rich by most people's standards, especially not when you look at the concentrations of wealth in a few hands of you know, the 0.1%. You know, I would just like to see resources more evenly distributed so that people can have a decent quality of life. Yeah, call me a hippie.
Shepard Fairey, thank you very much indeed.